Hello and welcome to Cold Takes. In this video, I would like to explain why I personally have absolute faith in the Penguins' future and its management. Before going into that, however, I need to briefly explain the situation that Kyle Dubas had going into his new team. The state that Ron Hextall left the Penguins roster in was absolutely abysmal. Kyle Dubas came into Pittsburgh with an aging core, with secondary pieces like Rust and Raquel being extended for way too much for way too long. There were also anchor contracts for older players that were keeping the Penguins older, slower, and restricted the team's spending to acquire new and better players. The Penguins had 1 first, 1 3rd, 1 5th, 1 6th, and 2 7ths in the 2023 NHL draft and added their best prospect in the process. Brayden Yager was drafted 14th overall and was one of my personal favorite prospects coming into that year. He followed up his draft year by putting up 95 points in 57 games in the WHL and helped lead his team to the Memorial Cup playoffs where he had 6 points in 4 games. He also had 5 points in 5 games during the World Juniors while playing on a line with Macklin Celebrini. Yager is automatically the Penguins' best prospect in their system. Emil Pieniniemi was selected 91st overall in the 3rd round and followed up his draft year playing 38 games in the Finnish Pro League, or Liga, and put up 6 points as a defensive defenseman. Mikhail Ilyin was selected 142nd in the 5th round and played 65 games in the KHL, putting up 29 points this past season. I personally do not possess analytics on him, as my source for those analytics does not provide them for the KHL. However, his Elite Prospects report seems to describe him as a player who makes quick plays, is physical in defending the puck, and has an excellent drive. Cooper Foster was selected 174th overall in the 6th round and put up 52 points in 59 games in the OHL, improving his points per game by approximately 30%. As a 6th round pick not putting up a point per game pace in the OHL, I personally doubt he makes it to the NHL level. However, you never know, and I could always be proven wrong. Emil Harbente was selected 217th in the 7th round and was one of my favorite late-round targets heading into that year's draft. I always tend to favor players who played in pro leagues rather than junior leagues in their draft year, and he played 15 games in the Liga. He followed up his draft year with only 4 games in the Liga, but put up the same amount of points in that span, and scored at a much higher rate in the Mestis, which is essentially the Finnish AHL, where he put up 21 points in 41 games. Lastly, Kalle Kangas was selected 223rd overall in the 7th round and played 8 games in the Liga and 40 games in the Mestis. Kalle put up 9 points as a defensive defenseman and also played for the Finnish U20 World Juniors team. The Erik Karlsson trade was Dubas' masterclass, as he traded away 3 separate bad contracts in Mikael Granlund, Jeff Petrie, and Jan Ruda in a deal that returned Erik Karlsson while only adding a first-round pick. This trade was an absolute steal, as we dumped $14 million in cap hit, traded away a first, and received Erik Karlsson fresh off the first 100-point season by a defenseman in almost 30 years, a 3rd-round pick, and a player that was later traded for a 7th. While Erik Karlsson did not live up to the hype here in Pittsburgh, this is still an absolutely amazing trade that dumped 3 contracts that were holding the Penguins back for a superstar while minimally adding future assets to the deal. In Dubas' first free agency as GM of the Pittsburgh Penguins, he did not bring back any of Jason Zucker, Brian Dumoulin, or Danton Heinen, and instead chose to spend that money in free agency or on extensions. Dubas chose to extend Tristan Jarry to a 5-year, $5.375 million average, as the goalie market was not especially strong at that moment, and chose to go with the player the team already had rather than risk a new goalie. This contract has not aged well in its first year. However, Jarry is an incredibly streaky goalie, and one good season or a solid month before the trade deadline could cause another team to try to trade for him and allow the Penguins to call up prospect Joel Blomqvist for the last bit of the regular season. The Penguins also signed goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic to a 1-year, $1.5 million contract, to which he outperformed and took the starting net for the last few weeks of the regular season. He earned himself a 2-year, $2.5 million extension this offseason. Noel Acciari is a personal favorite player of mine, and when I saw that the Penguins had signed him, I was elated. That being said, he is definitely being overpaid on a 3-year, $2 million average contract as a fourth-line center or wing. He does bring the right style of a game as a penalty killer, forechecker, and defensive forward, but is pretty unnoticeable on the Penguins. Lars Eller was initially a signing I disliked and was against. I viewed him as a 35-year-old player who only provided value on defense and had zero to negative offensive value or potential. He was signed to a 2-year, $2.45 million average and outperformed it as a third-line center faceoff specialist who scored 31 points. Ryan Graves, on the other hand, was a player that I actually did want the Penguins to sign initially. He had a great defensive analytics on New Jersey, had size, which the Penguins lacked at 6'5", and was 28, which is young for a Pittsburgh Penguin. Graves was definitely a disappointment last year, but I still have faith that he can be an above-average defensive defenseman on the second or third pair for the Penguins. He is and always will definitely be overpaid, but I personally believe he will be worth more to the Penguins in future seasons than he is right now. While the Jake Guentzel trade was reviewed as absolutely terrible by casual Penguins fans because we did not receive a first in return, I was actually incredibly excited about it. Rather than acquiring one high-value asset, Dubas acquired 3 A- to B-level prospects, a second that later turned into Harrison Brunicky, and Michael Bunting, a player that I actually originally wanted Dubas to sign in the previous free agency. He knew the trade would be viewed as unpopular, yet he made the hard decision to get rid of a fan favorite and acquire desperately needed future assets, rather than to extend Guentzel to a high cap hit and force this team into a cap situation where they are even more top-heavy and lack depth scoring. The 2024 NHL Draft is where you start to see some trends in Dubas' draft strategy. He seems to like drafting players who played in the Finnish and North American pipelines. He so far has drafted 5 players from the CEHL, 3 players from Liga or Mestis, 2 players from the NCAA, and the outlier being 1 from the KHL, but then also 1 from the USHL. Dubas has in total selected 12 players for the Penguins so far. Dubas' first selection of the 2024 NHL Draft was Harrison Brunicky at 44th overall in the second round. Brunicky put up 21 points in 49 WHL games and also played for the Canadian U18 World Junior team, where he put up 4 points in 7 games. Usually, when a team has 2 or multiple second-round picks, only 1 or none of them pan out, and if I had to bet on it, Brunicky would be the dud of the Penguins' second round this year. However, Brunicky is a player with an incredibly talented toolset and was a late first-round draft pick in multiple NHL rankings. Tanner Howe was drafted 2 picks later in the second round, and is who I am really excited about from this class for the Penguins. Howe put up 77 points in 68 games and filled the captaincy and production hole left by the departing Connor Bedard for the Regina Pats in the WHL. The only thing I need to tell you about his game is that one of his idols and a player he models his game after is Brad Marchand. Pittsburgh is definitely rightfully excited about Tanner Howe. Chase Pietila is a 20-year-old overager who was drafted 111th overall in the 4th round. He put up 22 points in 40 games in his freshman season in the NCAA. Chase has an uphill battle being drafted at 20, however he had absolutely elite puck possession, playmaking, passing, and skating analytics in his first year in the NCAA. Joona Väisänen was selected 175th overall in the 6th round and put up 40 points in 53 games in his first season in North America playing in the USHL. He has also played for Finland's U20 World Juniors team. He had elite metrics playing in the USHL in almost all categories except for physicality and entering and exiting the zone with the puck. Max Swanson was selected 207th overall in the 7th round and put up 77 points in 55 games in the USHL and is committed to the University of North Dakota next season. Mac had an incredibly high average in his analytics, but never showcased as elite in any of them. He is a high-end playmaker and could turn into a key contributor for North Dakota if he makes the difficult jump well. Finally, Finn Harding was drafted 223rd overall in the 7th round and put up 34 points in 68 games as a defenseman in the OHL. It's always possible that a 7th round pick can make it to the NHL. However, I tend to doubt players who failed to put up at least close to a point per game in a league that has so many players putting up high scoring amounts. This offseason, Dubas seemingly changed his strategy entirely. Rather than adding expensive players with term to help the team win now, he has put an emphasis on low-term, buy low candidates that he could potentially trade at the deadline in order to make roster space for young players to dip their feet at the NHL level. Matt Grzelcyk is probably my favorite signing this offseason, as he has had excellent seasons and postseason performances for the Bruins and was an excellent pairmate for Charlie McAvoy. He had a very down season last year and was a healthy scratch for numerous games. He is a total buy low candidate, and if he has a solid season, he could be flipped for future assets. Anthony Beauvillier is also a signing I was excited about. He has consistently been a 20 to 40 point scorer and has tremendous two-way value. While his offensive touch has definitely decreased over time, and he is coming off a down season where he played on 3 separate NHL teams, his floor is simply a two-way forward with limited offensive upside to play in the bottom 6. Blake Lizotte possesses elite speed, which is something that the Penguins are desperately lacking in while playing in Mike Sullivan's speed-based system. His speed is definitely his top talent, and he will play in the Pens' bottom 6 and will most likely not contribute too much to the team's offense, but he brings skating prowess to a team that desperately needs it. The average age of the Penguins' major free agent signings this year was 26.7, which is a lot better than the average of 30 years old from the free agent class the year before. The Kevin Hayes trade was the perfect deal for the Penguins in my opinion. They acquired a second-round pick and a player who can potentially increase depth scoring and open up a possibility of trading Lars Eller for value now, of which I would project a 3rd round pick or a 4th and an extra late in return for Eller. This also opens up the possibility of one of the new free agents, Noel Acciari, or a younger player to take the 4th line center role. Dubas also was surprisingly able to receive a higher return for Riley Smith than he acquired him for, although he did have to retain 25% on his contract for 1 year on his $5 million cap hit. Dubas has seemingly put an emphasis on acquiring higher round draft picks farther in the future rather than picks in sooner drafts at a later round. Riley Smith returned a 2025 conditional 5th and a 2027 2nd. Dubas did a very similar thing in the prior year's trade deadline, where he traded Chad Ruhwedel for a 2027 4th rather than a 5th to 7th round pick in an earlier draft. Dubas's long-term plan seems to be acquiring young players right now in the core's twilight years that can play in the NHL at the end of or right after Crosby's career ends. After this, the Penguins can finally bottom out, as they will finally not be supported by elite old players who manage to keep the team out of the basement but not in the playoffs. Then, that next wave of lottery pick talent can be surrounded by the young, already established players acquired in the current post-playoff contending era of Penguins hockey. I have never had as much faith in an NHL general manager than I do right now in Kyle Dubas, and I hope that I have adequately explained why I have so much trust in the future of the Pittsburgh Penguins, my hometown team. With that being said, this is Cold Takes, and thanks for watching.